Hello, and welcome to Spotlight on Science from St George's University of London. My name is Julian Marr, and today in this third video on coronavirus, we're going to be thinking about the progress that's been made with the vaccines against COVID-19. Over the last few weeks, we've heard about over 100 candidate vaccines which have been developed by various groups around the world. And in the UK, there are two lead candidate vaccines, one developed from the University of Oxford and one from Imperial College. Later on in this video, you'll be hearing from Professor Paul Heath, who runs the Vaccine Institute at St George's, which is one of the clinical trial sites for both vaccines. We'll also hear from Fran, a research nurse, and she'll be telling us what it's like to be a volunteer on the vaccine trials. And then we have the two chief scientists from those two vaccine development teams, Professor Andrew Pollard from the University of Oxford and Professor Robin Shattuck from Imperial College. But before we start, I would like to just get us all onto the same page as to what a vaccine is and what we're trying to do with it. Essentially, vaccines are mimics for pathogens, and they stimulate our immune systems to provide long-lasting protection against diseases. We're all familiar with vaccines. We've had them as children. Some of us have had them as adults if we've travelled abroad. And at the moment, there are about 26 vaccines against major diseases. But there are still important diseases that we don't have vaccines for. HIV stands out, of course. Tuberculosis protection in adults is very difficult. And of course, the one that we all want at the moment is the one against COVID-19. Now, what are we looking for in a good vaccine? Well, in general, vaccines have to be acceptable, affordable, and accessible. And I think it's true to say that no vaccine is perfect, but actually many of the ones that we have are pretty close. So what do I mean by acceptable? Well, a vaccine has to be safe, of course, and it has to have ideally no side effects, or if there are side effects, they have to be acceptable. It needs to protect a high proportion of patients against the disease, and it needs to work in all of our target populations. We've seen in COVID-19 how the elderly are particularly prone to serious consequences of COVID-19. So the vaccine has to work in the elderly as well as in younger adults and in children. It needs to be easy to administer. We don't want a vaccine that requires multiple doses before it starts to work. And once you're vaccinated, ideally you're going to have long-lasting protection. And with a disease like COVID-19, we also have to think about how we're going to deliver the vaccine to the rest of the world. And therefore it has to be affordable and accessible. It needs to be low cost to produce. We have to think about people in less developed regions of the world, low and middle income countries, and how we're going to make an affordable vaccine for them. We need to be able to manufacture at very high volume. There's a population of around 8 billion people in the world, and most of them are going to want a COVID-19 vaccine. And thinking about the different regions in the world, a vaccine has to be easy to store and transport to different areas of the world. Well, that's probably enough from me for the time being. Let's go and meet some of the people who are actually working on the COVID-19 vaccines. So to begin with, we're going to meet Professor Paul Heath. Paul is the Professor of Paediatric Infectious Diseases at St George's, and he's also the Director of our Vaccine Institute. Paul, thanks ever so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Julian.
You're in charge of our Vaccine Institute, which is doing all the clinical trials, the vaccine trials for coronavirus. Tell us a bit about the Vaccine Institute and what it does.
The Vaccine Institute is purpose-made for clinical trials. Those trials have been in adults, prominently, but also we do many pediatric vaccine studies. Often they're done in the family home, but sometimes we also do them in the Vaccine Institute.
Okay. And can you tell me something about how you recruit volunteers into the trials?
Yeah, sure. A whole range of options are available. And so, for example, for our current trial, the COVID vaccine trial, that is predominantly trying to recruit healthcare workers. So we're recruiting through the hospital and the university through specific emails that go out to all of these groups. But it's also through our media officer. It is also directed to the local media, local press, newspapers, radio stations, and then it spreads far and wide thereafter.
I see. So, so I understand that the Oxford trials have been going on apace, and that you're now entering what's called phase 3 trials, and you're shortly going to be starting a different vaccine from Imperial College, which is a phase 1 trial. Can you just explain what the difference between a phase 3 and a phase 1 trial is, please?
Yes, certainly. The phase 3 trial that we're doing with the Oxford vaccine is also called an efficacy trial. So it really is trying to see whether the vaccine is effective at preventing the disease.
Mm-hmm.
The efficacy trial, if suitably large, and it does need to be large, will ultimately demonstrate whether this vaccine, this COVID vaccine, can prevent COVID in the recipients of that vaccine.
Okay.
So that's the phase 3 trial.
Mm.
The phase 1 trial, of course, is the first in human trial with such a vaccine. And that's done in a much smaller number of recipients, perhaps 20 to 50 of that order. They will be healthy adults. And the purpose of that is to look at the safety of the vaccine when used for the first time in humans.
So the Oxford trial has been through that earlier on?
Absolutely, yes. And then if that shows some suggestion of immunogenicity as well as safety, then it would move on to the phase 3 trial, the trial that we're now doing with the Oxford vaccine.
I understand, thank you. And just finally, I'm kind of interested in how much it takes to run these clinical trials. I mean, you know, the phase 1, which was the smaller one, roughly how much does that cost?
Oh, how much does it cost to run a phase 1 trial? I can't really give you a cost for a phase 1 trial. I don't think.
Perhaps a ballpark? Are we talking like tens of thousands, 100,000s?
We're talking hundreds of thousands, certainly, yes. And then, depending on the number recruited, of course, it will be millions for the phase 3.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks ever so much for talking to me today, Paul. And I'd like to wish you all the best for the current trials and those which are coming up soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Julian.
Well, next I'd like to welcome Professor Andy Pollard. Andy is the Professor of Paediatric Infection and Immunity at the University of Oxford. Andy, thanks very much for finding the time to join us. So can you tell us about the vaccine and how do you expect it to work?
Well, what the vaccine is it's actually made from a common cold virus called an adenovirus, which has had part of its genetic code removed, so it can't make any new viruses. So when it's used as a vaccine, it's alive, but it doesn't then go on to cause an infection, which makes it completely safe. And what we've done with this virus is taken the genes which are used to make spike protein from coronavirus and put them into this common cold virus, so that when that is used as a vaccine, we make immune responses against the critical part of the coronavirus.
I see. And that sounds like quite a high-tech vaccine compared to the conventional vaccines that we're more familiar with. Why have you gone that route straight away and not tried the more conventional approaches?
Well, actually, around the world at the moment, there are said to be 150 different vaccines that are in various stages of design and development. 10 of those already in clinical trials. The vast majority of them are actually using new types of platform technologies. And the reason for that is if you already have a technology which allows you to move very quickly to insert, for example, a new gene, you can get into clinical trials much earlier, which of course is necessary in the urgency of a pandemic. There are some of the vaccines in trials are using conventional approaches, killing the virus and using that as a way of making a vaccine. Those approaches are being tested at the moment, and it will be very interesting to see which of the very different technologies being used are going to provide the best level of protection against this virus. I think we need lots of technologies out there to find the winner.
Sure. And
in fact, I should say the winners, because I think the best thing is to have multiple different hits on the target.
I know that the vaccine trials have been going on really fast. What results have you had so far?
The trials are progressing well. We've recruited the phase 1/2 trial, which are the first in human trials, and then an expanded sample size of adults, over 1,000 people vaccinated. And we're now moving into the next phase of trials, which includes older adults, where we know it's much tougher to get good immune responses, so we're studying them in great detail. And then a much larger study to find out whether the vaccine actually protects people, and that's currently focused on hospital workers, primary care staff, and people in the front line of the fight against coronavirus.
Okay, so you're not studying all age groups yet?
No, we're starting with younger adults, and the definition of that is the under 55s. And the next stage of the studies, which is actually just underway from this week, will be studying older adults, and that is in two groups, the over 55s and the over 70s. And then later, when we've got a bit further through these clinical trials, we'll then study the immune responses in children.
Okay. So over the weekend, we heard about the possibility that these trials may not be able to be completed because of the dropping numbers, which of course is good news. But are there other ways we can use to identify if the vaccine is working?
Well, I think the best way of really understanding the impact of these vaccines is to test them in the field where there's natural exposure to the virus. And so one of the approaches we've taken there is our current trials, which are just getting underway, involve very large numbers of people. We will have around about 10,000 in the UK trials. And we're also now working with international investigators to expand that number around the world. And that includes, as you may have heard recently in the news, that AstraZeneca, who are partnered with Oxford, are planning a trial of 30,000 people in the United States. And our intention is to try and combine the data from all these trials to try to work out how well the vaccine works as early as possible.
And perhaps finally, we're acutely aware that this is a global pandemic. How accessible do you think your vaccine approach will be for providing vaccines to the population of the world if necessary?
Well, I think a really important component of the deal that the university made with AstraZeneca is sort of a guarantee of equitable access around the world. And the second is not-for-profit during the pandemic period. So that means that the vaccine development is going with the absolute intention of being able to manufacture and make provision around the world.
Thank you very much, Andy. We're really excited to see how this vaccine develops, and well done for the work so far.
Thank you very much, Julian.
Well, next I'd like to introduce you to Fran. Fran is one of the research nurses at the St George's Vaccine Institute, and she, along with a team of others, are helping run the clinical trials at the moment. Thanks, Fran, for joining us.
So, Fran, I'm very much interested in what it's like to be a volunteer on the trial.
At St George's, currently, we are recruiting anybody who is healthy and is between the age of 18 to 55. But they should be healthy. They shouldn't have been underlying health issues such as diabetes.
So can you tell me what the process is? Let's say I'm volunteering and then I put my name, I think, online, isn't it, as a volunteer?
We've got an online advertisement, and with that online, we first give you a questionnaire to fill in. If you are eligible to join the study, we'll give you a call, and then you'll be invited to come for the screening. On the screening day, what you'd expect is we will obviously, during this period, we will give you a mask. We will be having the mask, aprons, and gloves. So that's how it's working these days.
Right.
And once that is done, when you come in, we'll ask you to watch a video. The reason is just to make sure that before you consent, you know what you are signing for.
So that video would tell me about the vaccine and the things that you're going to do during the trial, is it?
Yes, it will tell you about the vaccine, what you can expect once you have had the vaccine, and during the vaccine period, what you should be doing during the vaccine period.
I see.
The side effects that you are likely to experience.
And you mentioned screening. What does that mean?
We'll do physical examination. We'll collect medical history, and we will do the bloods. We want to check how healthy you are.
I see.
We want to see how your liver is doing, how your liver is functioning. We want to see your kidney function. And we also want to see if you've got a good HB, because we will be taking bloods from you.
Hemoglobin, you mean?
Yes, hemoglobin,
yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So really, if you get accepted onto the trial, it's a statement that you're pretty healthy.
Yes, you are pretty healthy, yes.
Okay. And then how do you give the vaccine?
When you come in, we will give you the vaccine on your deltoid, which is, in simple terms, on your shoulder.
Right. Does it hurt?
Once you take, it's a needle. Yes,
Okay.
so you kind of like expect that. Most people are different. Most people, they say, oh, I didn't even feel it go in. Some people say, I felt a bit of a sting.
And then what? How long would you keep me in for until you let me go home?
Once you have had your vaccination, you will be with us for the next 30 minutes to an hour, just for us to observe you that you are not having any reaction with the vaccine that we have given you.
Okay.
And after that period, we'll do the observations, which is pulse, BP, and temperature.
So that's just to check that I don't have an immediate reaction to the vaccine. And
yes.
Yeah.
After that, we still need to set you up for electronic diary. So the purpose of the electronic diary is for you to put in anything that you can or will experience during the period, the 7 days period post-vaccination. Things that you should write in your diary is, are you experiencing any fever, any tenderness on the injection site, any itching? Are you feverish, having headaches, malaise, fatigue?
Yeah, I was going to say some of those are quite common reactions to vaccines, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Yeah, yes, what we've got in the electronic diary is things that are common with vaccines.
Okay.
Once you have had your first vaccine, we will like to see you in the next 28 days, give or take 7 days.
Okay.
In the next 28 days, we will do the bloods again.
And so is it at the end of 28 days, is that it?
We still have to follow up. So the follow-up will be 28 days and 5 months from 28 days. And then from there, you will be followed up in 1 year's time.
Okay, all right. Okay.
So the trial, technically, you will be with us there for 1 year.
For 1 year, okay. Thank you very much for that, Fran. That's really interesting and I think very helpful for people who are thinking about volunteering.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay.
So next we're going to speak to Robin Shattuck from Imperial College. Robin is the Professor of Mucosal Infection and Immunity. And thank you very much for taking the time to come and speak to us, Robin.
My pleasure.
So, Robin, I understand you've developed a very new and rather innovative approach to the vaccination. Can you tell us about it and how it works?
Yes, so we're using a very simple approach in some ways, in that we use the genetic code, or part of the genetic code of the virus, that produces that spike that you see on the surface of the virus. So those little spikes you see sticking out. So we take that genetic code, we put it in the equivalent of a tiny fat droplet and inject that into the muscle of a volunteer, and then their muscle cells actually start producing that spike. And in that way, we trick the immune system to make it think it's seen the virus. It makes protective antibodies so that when you're exposed to the virus naturally, you're already immune.
So, I don't believe your trial has started yet. Can you tell us when that will be and what's your sort of research timetable?
Yes, so our plan or our timetable is to start our first in-human study on the 15th of June. And what we do is a classic dose escalation study. So we start with a dose much lower than the dose that we anticipate we'll need for safety in a single volunteer. Then we go to 5 volunteers. We start to increase the dose. And ultimately in that first trial, we aim to enroll at least 300 volunteers so that we build up a very robust safety profile. And we also study the immune response. And the plan is that if that all goes successfully, we'd then be able to expand to a large efficacy trial of at least 6,000 people, multiple centres across the UK by October.
And would you be, for that first trial, would you be restricting it to particular populations, age groups?
So we're definitely wanting people who haven't been exposed to the virus in that first study. And we're looking at 2 age groups. 18 to 45, because we know that that's where you're at your peak in terms of immune response. but also in a separate cohort of 60 to 75.
And how can people sign up for the trial? Can they do it yet?
Well, I suspect we will have a lot of volunteers, and so some people will be disappointed that they can't immediately join in that first trial, but there will be opportunities as we scale out to a 6,000 person trial in October to have more people involved.
Okay. We heard recently about the problem of declining numbers of COVID patients and how that might affect vaccine trials. Do you need there to be a lot of disease around, or are there other ways you can use to detect whether your vaccine is working?
We don't know, in our case, what the epidemic will look like in the UK by October. And there's always a concern that there may be a second wave of infection. We'll be very proactive at trying to prioritise recruitment in any areas of the country where we see higher rates of infection. But we are also looking at trying to set up a parallel study somewhere else in the world where incidence may be higher to increase our chances of success.
Now, Robin, your background is in HIV. You're very well known for your work in HIV vaccination development. And I know that foremost in your mind has always been the issue of making vaccines affordable and accessible to poorer regions of the world. So how does the technology you're using for the COVID vaccine address that?
Well, this is one of the reasons that we really started working on the technology anyway, is because of the issue of speed and manufacturability. So we already are able to make the equivalent of 2 million doses in a litre of material.
Wow.
That's, traditional vaccines would need 1,000 litres, maybe 10,000 litres, a large factory. So we anticipate that as people get more familiar with the technology and with the manufacturing, you could have very small manufacturing plants in different parts of the world. And that we think would help with vaccine equity. It would also help with future pandemics because different parts of the world could start manufacturing the same vaccines simultaneously.
Well, it's fantastic to hear about this new technology and how quickly it's been taken up in the fight against COVID. So, Robin, good luck with your work and really hope you do well in your clinical trials. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Julian.
I hope that's provided you with an interesting insight into how vaccines are made and the progress that we're making in COVID-19. What I want to impress upon you is that the advances that are being made with these two vaccines in the UK has really been achieved in record time. This is a process that can normally take 10 to 15 years and is being condensed into a period of just under a year, whilst trying to maintain the quality and the safety of the vaccines that we all expect. What you haven't seen is the huge number of people who are working so hard behind the scenes. The scientists, the doctors, the nurses, and of course the fantastic people who volunteer for the vaccine trials. And we shouldn't forget too the people in the pharmaceutical industry, without whose experience and expertise none of these vaccines would ever get made. If you'd like to find out more details about the Oxford vaccine and the Imperial vaccine, and also the trials going on at St George's and elsewhere, then these are the websites that you can go to. You'll also find details on those sites about how to volunteer for any one of the clinical trials that are currently recruiting. St George's scientists are carrying out research in many aspects of coronavirus, not just the vaccine. And if you'd like to find out more about what we're doing, then you can find the details on this webpage. And if you're able to help, then this webpage will take you to a site where you can make a donation to our Coronavirus Research Fund. Finally, I'd like to thank all the people who helped put this video together. Do keep an eye out for our other Spotlight on Science events, and you can find out more about those at this web address. Thank you, take care and stay safe.